We're returning to the book of Revelation this morning after a few weeks of a break. And as we come back to Revelation chapter 9 and 10, we're right in the heart of the action. We're right in the heart of the part of the Bible that gives the part of Revelation that gives it its reputation for being a bit strange and all kinds of weird and wonderful things going on. And so we're going to have some crazy scenes to read and to think about this morning as we read what John is telling us he saw in his vision while he was in exile on the island of Patmos in what's today Greece. In those days I think was Turkey, thought of as being Turkey. And while he was in exile on that island, he had this amazing vision of the things that must soon take place. And so before we read, it's worth remembering that it is a vision, and it's a dramatic depiction of spiritual themes and hidden realities. It's something in pictures that you can't really picture. It's a symbol. So what we're about to read is symbols of what's going on in the world. They're symbols that represent what's going on in history. It's an unfortunate thing that, I believe, it's an unfortunate thing that there are quite a few people who read this and think that they've got to wait until they see these scenes actually unfolding before them on the planet, before they believe that the Lord is going to return, that we're in the end days. But I think that the overall message of Revelation is that we are in the end days. The end days began when the Lord arrived on planet Earth. That was the beginning of the end for evil. And what we see in these pictures is the Holy Spirit telling John the things that are the spiritual truth behind what's happening. They are symbols and signs of the way life is. And we've said that before. Here's an illustration to think about it. Many of us are probably looking forward to going on a holiday again soon, and maybe as you've been missing holiday after holiday, you begin to pine for those places that you went to as a child, and those memories come back. And so for some of us that might be Scotland, for some of us it might be Cornwall, for some of us it might be Wales. For me it's Wales. And I can always remember going on holiday as a child and looking out of the window in the great big rusty minibus that we went on holiday in, and seeing when we got to a new county and seeing how close we were getting to Wales. And then suddenly when we got to Wales, you felt like you were on holiday. The big sign says Wales in big letters. And of course, one of us would say, usually me, we're now in Wales. And we felt like we were on holiday. Now, of course, just to illustrate the point that we're making about Revelation, the sign itself is not Wales. The sign says Wales, but it isn't Wales. It might actually be in England, but as you drive past at 70 miles an hour, you're being told you are now in Wales. It would be strange, wouldn't it, if everybody camped around that sign and tried to think that the sign itself was Wales. And when we read the book of Revelation, that's a really helpful way of understanding what you're reading. You're reading the sign of the reality. And so we're not reading things that are going to happen physically. This is a symbol of what is going on in the world all the time. And so we're going to read about monsters this morning. We're going to read about armies of monsters, and we're going to read about the end of the matter. And so the title of the sermon this morning is something like Monsters, Armies, and the End of the Matter. That's what happens when you're up late at night writing sermons. You come up with grand titles like that. And so we're not going to read, we're reading 2 chapters of Revelation. We're right in the middle of this action, all this crazy stuff that John's seeing. First of all, this morning we're reading chapter 9, verses 1 to 12 of Revelation. And this is in the middle of the angels sounding their trumpets from heaven. And John is getting these messages, getting these pictures of what's going on in the world and what will continue to go on in the world until the end of the matter. And so Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. The 5th angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by smoke from the abyss. And out of the smoke, locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not allowed to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes. During those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails and stings like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, that is, destroyer. The first woe is past, 2 other woes are yet to come. This is really the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? If this was a film, it would be an 18. This is War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells type stuff, isn't it? This idea of this alien horde suddenly coming from the abyss, surrounded with smoke, and they look like locusts but horses, and they've got faces like people and hair like women's hair and all kinds of things, stings that can torment people for 5 months. And you could imagine, couldn't you, the blockbuster movie, seeing it on the cinema screen, these monsters plaguing the earth. What on earth is going on here? This is the stuff of nightmares. The truth is that the reality is that the Bible speaks quite often, doesn't it, and consistently, maybe more than we would want it to speak in our 21st century politeness. It speaks very often of the presence of evil. In fact, from the very beginning, there was that liar, wasn't there, in the garden in paradise. And he sowed that lie into the minds of the human race, and it's been there ever since. That liar is here in this passage. He is the one called the destroyer towards the end there, Apollyon, the one who comes to destroy. And he is clearly the king of all of these horrific evil monsters that are plaguing the planet and running amok. And as I've already said, we are not to read that one day this is actually going to happen. A great big hole is going to appear from somewhere, and all these locusts are going to come out. No, this is a symbol, it's a picture, it's telling us the reality of what's going on in human history all the time. The world is beautiful, but when the human race believed the lie of the destroyer and willingly rebelled against God, evil came flooding in. If you want to be able to pin this in some kind of way in human history, then I would suggest we pin it right at the beginning. That evil flooded into this world in this kind of way that it's described here. And all kinds of minions of the destroyer went about doing their business, and life has been hard ever since, hasn't it? Life is not the easy roller coaster the easy ride we might want it to be, the luxury cruise we might want it to be. Life is not the luxury cruise that many churches might lead us to believe sometimes. No, the Bible is very honest. We're surrounded by evil all the time. The world is beautiful, but it's polluted. The sun shines, but it's obscured. This smoke comes up, doesn't it? And it obscures the sun. The inhabitants of this vision are aware that the sun is there, that it's shining, that it's good, but it's obscured by the smoke of evil that's everywhere. This spiritual pollution affects everything. C.S. Lewis said that when he first read the New Testament, that one of the things that first surprised him was that it talks so much about a dark power in the universe, a mighty evil spirit who was held to be the power behind death and disease and sin. And then he says, this world is enemy-occupied territory. And this is what John is seeing in his vision, the occupation of this mighty power symbolized in this dramatic way. Verse 11, Apollyon, the destroyer. Verse 3, these monsters arise and they fill the earth, and they're permitted to have this. And we've seen this already, haven't we, in Revelation, how they want to come out and they want to do evil, and they want to do unlimited evil. They want to completely destroy the whole thing, this good creation that God has made, but the harm that they do is limited, and that's repeated through these verses again, isn't it? The harm that they are allowed to do is limited in time, and it's limited in scope as well. Evil, it seems we're being told in Revelation, John is writing to these persecuted churches under the hammer blows of the Roman Empire initially. That's who he's writing to, and he's saying, guys, this evil that you're facing, these monsters that you're facing, evil must have its day, but it's limited. There is a limiting hand behind it, and we've seen that before as we've been through Revelation. And we have to admit, don't we, when we think about these stinging monsters, that life has a sting. Life has a sting that shouldn't have been there, wasn't intended to be there. And isn't it good that, again, to say we've got a word from God that is honest. We've got a word from God that is absolutely clear on how life is, not pretending that it's anything else. In verses 7 and 8, we're told more about these monsters that come out of the abyss. And we're told that they have human faces, and that they have hair like women's hair, and that their teeth were like lions' teeth. And what we're being told here, what these original readers back in the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago would have been thinking about, and what we're led to think about in this picture, is that this evil manifests itself in different ways in all different generations. This evil is going to bring monstrous suffering and pain and fear to millions. This is what evil does. This is evil revealed. This is sin revealed. Very often sin is kind of thought of as very lightly nowadays, isn't it? It's even kind of seen as a good thing or a bit of a jokey thing. There are ice creams named 7 deadly sins and things like that, and we think sin is this kind of thing that we can mess about with. But this book is called Revelation, and this vision is revealing what's behind those sinful decisions that we make. That it's pure evil. It's sinister and it's destructive. That's what's behind. And whenever God tells the human race, don't do this, it's because he knows that behind that smiley face, behind that comfortable facade of the sinful choice and decision and words, the decisions that you're making, lies this pit of evil. And that sin has this horrible sting. There are those who find after a few years that they married a monster, or that they're being raised by one. And there are those in the world today who, wherever you go through history, and right up to our present day, there are those living today who know very clearly that their nation is being ruled by monsters. That's what they would say, isn't it? And we wouldn't expect to go to the throne room and find a snarling monster akin to this description here in these verses. But nevertheless, what they do and how they are and how they rule is monstrous. Monstrous evil is on the prowl in this creation of God's. That's what we're being told here. Of course, for the first readers of this prophecy, as we've already said, it was Caesar and the Roman Empire, wasn't it? They would have memories of the persecution of Nero, where thousands and thousands of Christians were cruelly treated and killed, thrown to the lions. Those Christians probably winced a little bit at the mention of the lion's teeth there in verse 8. They had teeth like lions, and some of them would have said, well, I know what that means because the last time I saw my dad, he was in the jaws of a lion down at the Colosseum. And so it's gone down the generations. This world is enemy-occupied territory. We see it in the shadow of sin that covers everything that we do. It's in our homes, it's in our governments, it's in the decisions that are made. From Nero in Rome to Hitler in Germany, the human face of evil, to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in the Middle East, where fear is the weapon of choice. And sometimes, just sometimes, when we're being really honest, there it is in the mirror too. Still today, many thousands will come face to face with these monsters in their various guises, seeking to destroy what is good and bringing torture and pain to those who are living. And then we move on and we find that this gets worse because this turns into a really overwhelming scene. If it wasn't already overwhelming, here we have now an army in verses 13 to 21 of chapter 9. We have an army. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar that is before God. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And the four angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the three plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the works of their hands. They did not stop worshipping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. And so taking John's attention now in this vision is this army of maybe even more monstrous creatures. And they come out as an army of hundreds of thousands of fiery soldiers going out in destruction all around the world. And this is a picture of an irresistible force. When John sees this, he must have thought to himself, all is lost, all is gone. This army of evil is irresistible. This destruction will be unyielding. And once again, this is not something we're being told to look out for at some future point in the history of the world. This is the revelation of things that are happening now, the hidden realities behind much of life. And how many times let's just repeat that, how many times do we see this horror played out on this planet of ours? Armies turned against innocent people. Ordinary innocent people are charged by overwhelming, overpowered forces of war. We could think of the history of our own nation, our own locality even, the Peterloo massacre in Manchester, or the 600,000 killed by the New Model Army in Ireland. If we were to ask the Uyghur people in China about this vision and what it reminds them of, it would not be some weird, obscure thing to them, would it? It would be the persecution that they're currently facing, being massacred in their thousands. Pretty accurate description of their present circumstances. This vision that we're reading is not some future obscure event. It's the living reality of many people in the world today. And all of that is to say, church, we lived, C.S. Lewis was right, and the Bible is telling us we live in enemy-occupied territory. And I would, as much as you, love the world to be a holiday camp, for life to be a beach, but it isn't. And we live, as C.S. Lewis goes on to say in Mere Christianity, in the part of the universe occupied by the rebel, where the sun does not shine quite as wonderfully as it should, where pure goodness is obscured and hidden by the smoke of a foul pit of evil, where you will be opposed for your faith, even targeted for it, where the destroyer has his stronghold. That's where we live. Where evil sometimes seems to come at you like an irresistible force threatening to crush and destroy. And I know that this doesn't sound very encouraging or inspiring or uplifting. But you know, for those of us who have or are currently today experiencing the storms of life rushing at us like an irresistible army, this word comes to us with comfort, doesn't it? That God says in his word, yeah, you live in enemy-occupied territory. This is how life is. Evil is having its day. And sometimes we come face to face with that, don't we? Isn't it good that we have a God who comes to us with things as they are, and not simply pretending and telling us that we've got to say everything's okay? Why do these evils assail us? The monsters of disease and sickness and the arrayed armies of depression and anxiety that well up in our own hearts. Those relationship problems that seem insurmountable, threaten to put out the sun altogether. We live in a fallen world. So what's our answer to this? What's God's answer to this? Isn't it good that that's not the end of the vision? Don't know if you've seen the film or read the book Lord of the Rings. You might remember the moment that Frodo and Sam reach the gates of Mordor, the Black Gate of Mordor, the main way in. And they see in this massively imposing wall, they see the entrance to Mordor, and they see huge armies arriving and leaving in front of them as they look from the distance. And Sam, in his usual matter-of-fact way, says, "Well, that's it then," and decides that it's time to go home and give up the whole thing. Poor Sam wants to go back to the Shire, wants to go back to where it's comfortable, but he can't. And we can easily feel like that, can't we? We can feel overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, an illness that seems to be threatening, a tragedy that seems to be looming, a bereavement that continues to haunt. But that's not the end of John's vision. And so thirdly and finally, this morning, we read about the end of all things. And in chapter 10, we see another character arrive, and this is an altogether different character. This is not a character from the pits of hell. This is not Apollyon the destroyer. This is a character who seems to be sent by God. It says in verse 10, "Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll which lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. Then when he shouted, the voices of 7 thunders spoke. And when the 7 thunders spoke, I was about to write. But I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Seal up what the 7 thunders have said, and do not write it down.' Then the angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven. And he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that's in them, and the earth and all that is in it, and the sea and all that is in it, and said, 'There will be no more delay. But in the days when the 7th angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets.' Then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me once more. 'Go take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land.' So I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. He said to me, 'Take it and eat it. It will turn sour in your stomach, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey.' I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and I ate it. It tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I'd eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then I was told, 'You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings.'" This third character comes in and he's dazzling with light, and he points up to heaven and he says, "That's where I've come from. I've come from the Creator." And he stands with 1 foot on sea and 1 foot on shore. He swears by him who lives forever there in verse 6. Here is one, in other words, who comes in the name of the Lord, and he declares an end of the enemy occupation. That's what he says. The time's up. Time's up for the enemy occupation. Things are beginning to be turned around. Just when it seems overwhelming and unbeatable and that like evil is going to win, God speaks. And this world of evil and monstrous armies, of intimidation and threat, of disease and death is not the end of the matter. There is more to say. God has not given up on this good world that he has made. He has not turned away from this chaos and this evil that surrounds us all. John, very bizarrely, not the first prophet to be told to eat a scroll. Ezekiel had done it centuries earlier, and it's the same principle, it's the same idea. God has something to say about the mess and the devastation of this world. And John, I'm giving it to you. And this is a picture for us that in this enemy-occupied territory that we live in, there is another story, a greater story, a deeper magic that God is sowing into this world. C.S. Lewis continues, Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed. You might say landed in disguise, and is calling us all to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. Isn't that a wonderful picture of what it is to be a Christian? Our king has landed in disguise, landed, in fact, as an embryo inside the tummy of a teenage mother. A wonderful picture of what God has done in Jesus Christ. A Christian, then, you and I, brother and sister, we are rebels living in rebellion against these apparently overwhelming forces of evil. That's what it means to be a Christian. That's what we're called to. We're not just called to consider Christ as an optional extra to make our lives better. We're called to be part of this cosmic battle that's going on. We're called to be saboteurs against evil. Isn't that a wonderful calling? That in your life, in your conversations, in the things that you allow your eyes to take in and your ears to hear, in the things that you allow your heart to set itself upon, in the things that you refuse yourself, that you are acting as a saboteur against evil, that this world has been overwhelmed by a tidal wave of sin and evil from the moment of that first lie. But the true king has come in disguise to retake his world, and living for him is to be part of the rebellion against evil. A Christian is someone who's found themselves trusting this King Jesus in his work on the cross to liberate them from the evil that's infected even their own heart. A Christian is someone who knows that evil is not all that there is, that there is a new creation coming, that it might look overwhelming, it might look like the world is going to set itself on fire and pollute itself to death, but the King has already come and he's put an end to that evil, he's put a limit on that evil, and one day he will return. That a new creation is coming, and that new creation is growing up around us as we live for King Jesus. And so what is a church? Who are we as we gather this morning? Well, under that kind of imagery that C.S. Lewis brings out there, a church is a gang of saboteurs. We are the resistance, sabotaging evil by loving our neighbour. Sabotaging evil by loving our enemy and praying for them. What an amazing calling we have. Church, some of us are facing death at the moment. If you're facing death, the act of rebellion is to live out the truth that resurrection life is yours, that death is not the end, that the King has spoken, that the King has acted. Some of us are facing the darkness of depression and anxiety. And for those of us that are facing the darkness of depression and anxiety, for us the act of rebellion is to continue to seek the sun, knowing that one day we will see it clearly and perfectly, and that in the meantime, however it feels, he has promised to be with you and to never forsake you. Our act of rebellion is to take him at his word. Some of us are facing threat and intimidation to turn our back on the faith and to say, like Sam Gamgee at the gates of Mordor, well, that's it then. This is too difficult. There's too much that I don't see. There's too much that I don't understand. And now I'm being threatened, and now I'm going to face this loss for following this king who's landed to save the world. And your act of rebellion is to say today, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. Some of us are facing the pain of betrayal and injustice and lies and unfairness. And your act of rebellion is to love your neighbour, to pray for those who persecute you, and to pursue peace in every situation. And the good news is that we win. We've won. With such a great and wonderful mission We must not give up meeting together. We must not give up meeting together to encourage one another in this rebellion, in this act, this work of saboteurs against evil. Because it's a difficult job, isn't it? It's a difficult calling, and we must continue to meet together and to encourage one another so that we can continue with our work. C.S. Lewis, to continue the quote, says, "When you go to church, you are really listening in to the secret wireless from our friends. That's why the enemy is so anxious to prevent us from going." Church, don't give up. Encourage one another. I want to ask, can you think of one person this week in the church to reach out to and encourage? Our King is returning. Continue to live lives of goodness and faithfulness and peace, even in the face of that raging enemy. He is defeated. His time is limited. Our King is on the move.